Hello, I'm Brent Frain. I'm the host of Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies, also known as PWD Allies, the podcast on YouTube. You can check out your favorite podcast on Spotify or any of your favorite apps where it's available. Today, I have Jean Swanson joining me on the show. Jean is an anti-poverty activist. She was a former Vancouver City Councillor. She was also inducted into the Order of Canada. Jean is an awesome person to have on here, and I'm so delighted to have you on, Jean, because you stand behind holding the government accountable on so many angles on homelessness. I mean, that's the key thing, and the poverty rates for persons with disabilities and income assistance, etc. So I'm going to move the mic over to you, and we can talk more on it.
Just before, I should say, when you and I talked on the phone, Jean, you were saying that you had never really talked about things from a disability perspective before necessarily. And so this is kind of your first chance to really dive deep into with a disability lens, to look at things from a disability lens. So that'll be exciting to see what your perspective on a few things is.
Yeah, it's about like raising the rates. I know that was a huge campaign that Jean was really focused on at the time too. And of course, as time goes on, it's like the time travel, and that's what we're kind of in now. It's like it just continues on. It just never really was eradicated, poverty. So yeah, over to you, Jean. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope I'll learn stuff about the disability lens that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely it's more of a learning curve when it comes to politicians to understand that poverty doesn't need to exist in anywhere in British Columbia or anywhere in Canada, or actually anywhere in the world, really. It's a policy choice, and it affects people's lives in so many ways where they don't have the bare minimum to get by and having all the essentials of poverty above poverty level. And I guess a lot of people will say, well, what is poverty level? It's the least amount that a person needs to get by. And of course, with people with disabilities, Jean, they have more extraordinary expenses above, somebody who's able-bodied, that, or maybe not even the word able-bodied, but somebody who can't really relate to having a disability because it hasn't really affected their lives directly. But of course, at any time in life, a person can get more disabilities, and they will. It's just either they're going to be more visible or as an impairment that will limit down their mobility over time. So holding the government to account on their obligation under the Canadian Charter of Rights of Persons with Disabilities is so important to have that fundamental place set in place and entrenched in there, and having the rates tied so that people don't have to struggle beyond means where they don't even have enough money to pay their market rent.
Yeah,
and that's where we'll dive into that part about
when we were advertising your spot, Jean. We put out a little video. It ended up being a bit of a mini podcast. But one of the things we talked about was being able to go back in time and see how things developed. like one of the things I would like to go back to is 93, 94, Mike Harcourt, because I don't know if you remember, Gene, but in 93, 94, it was during the news hour where Mike Harcourt stood up in front of a whole bunch of cameras during the news hour, and he said, everybody on welfare is cheats, varmints, and deadbeats. Do you remember that? Do you remember that he had that news conference and he stood up in front of cameras and he said that everybody on welfare is cheats, varmints, and deadbeats?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I just wanted to get your reflection on that, because I don't know if you know my situation, Gene, but it kind of stems from that, because it was very soon after he made those remarks where they started to claw back pensions and things like that, where they termed that pensions were unearned income. So right now, like for the last 10 years, my first wife passed away, and for the last 10 years, the provincial government has been clawing back my survivor's pension as unearned income. And that stems all the way back. To Mike Harcourt. So I just wanted to get your reflections on that time and what your opinions about that, what he said, and just everything kind of going forward from that. What are your reflections on that?
Time travel.
I was working at End Legislated Poverty then.
Okay.
We were a provincial coalition trying to end legislated poverty. And we did notice that, and we demanded a meeting with him to get him to tell him that he shouldn't say that, and he was being a jerk. And we got the meeting, and he was, anyway, he wasn't really contrite, to say the least. And I subsequently wrote a book called Poor Bashing: The Politics of Exclusion.
Right.
And
I
talk a lot in that book about how the poor bashing that started around 1990 was a precursor to a lot of the things that government policies that happened, like in the province, cutting back welfare, cutting out rights for people on welfare, cutting back on unemployment insurance, changing the name to employment insurance, cutting back on taxes for the rich. It was a whole, and free trade. Free trade was part of that, because free trade isn't really a great name for, I think of it more as a corporate rights deal, because it gives corporations the right to go to countries where they have low taxes, low environmental regulations, and low wages. And if corporations can go to where there's low wages, then people, and where there's very few social programs. So if you have a good social programs, then wages have to be higher to compete with them, right? So free trade kind of undermined all of that. And I go into it in quite a bit of detail in the book. But it was. And that time of around the early 90s, there was a whole bunch of poor bashing happening. I remember there was an article in the Sun about Somali immigrants ripping off the welfare system. And when you read the article, there actually was no evidence that it happened. Right. So it's not only poor bashing, it was racism. Yeah. And there was articles in the province about there was a welfare cheat line, and they were encouraging people to call in on welfare cheats, and the whole thing was really hard on low-income people. Yeah.
There was a site that was up there for years, Gene. You might have remember seeing it, where it would actually give you every single province. And it was basically back in the 90s. And it was every single province that would actually give you what their mandate was of reducing down their caseloads, of trying to, and some of the words was exactly the same thing. They said welfare cheats, we need to find ways of modernizing it so we can recoup that money, because they felt that people were not legitimately eligible for welfare at the time, and they were milking the system. in other words, right? And it was up there for years, and all of a sudden I was looking at it till some years ago now, and and I couldn't find it. It said the site was no longer available. I thought,
There was
interesting.
an actual study that was done in that period. I think
Yeah.
the province commissioned it, and it said, basically it said, if you make it really hard for people to get welfare, like have a whole bunch of ridiculous rules and regulations, then fewer people will be on welfare. Voila, we cut down our expenses, right? But then what happens
Job
is
done.
everyone's homeless, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, you know, that you say that you were heavily involved in anti-poverty activism way back in the 90s. So it goes to show that, I mean, this has gone on for 3 decades, and it's only gotten progressively worse, as you said, as you alluded to. And it's scary to me that we've had 3 decades. Think of all the governments, 3 decades worth of governments, and they have yet to figure it out. I mean, if that's not the definition of futility, I don't know what it is.
I think they have figured it out. They have figured out whose side they're on, and it's on our side.
That's true.
And so they're working for the side that they're on. And what we have to do is build a huge alliance of people that are on our side, which includes, you know, people with disabilities, people on welfare, low-income people, working people. And we have to try and get past their propaganda and get the things that we need, like better social programs, more nonprofit housing, higher wages, that kind of thing.
I remember when I was doing some research.
I didn't know. Sorry, I keep cutting you off, but I didn't know if you wanted to fast forward to the Gordon Campbell era, because that was another big slash and burn era, right?
Yeah.
Where a lot of bad stuff happened, right? Because again, we had this little mini podcast again to advertise your spot, Gene, and these are the 2 premiers that we kind of keyed on. These are the 2 key ones were Mike Harcourt in 93, 94, and then the next big one, the big bad baddie, if we want to say that was Gordon Campbell. And so I didn't know if you wanted to dive into that.
Sure.
So Gordon Campbell was bad. He brought in a bunch of welfare regulations that really started homelessness. But at the same time, the feds did something that was really important and really bad. We used to have what was called the Canada Assistance Plan Act, which was a big, thick act, like a telephone book, that laid out how the federal government would compensate provinces for welfare and social services. And what it basically said was, if the provinces increased their spending on social services and on welfare, the feds would pay half of it. And there was no limit, right? If the provinces want to increase it, the feds would pay half. Right. Just 1 second here.
Sure.
I have to grab this.
This is like show and tell.
This clipping.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
This is from 1996. I cut it out because my late partner's picture is on it, but it's about the Canada Assistance Plan Act. And this is from the Vancouver Sun in 1996. And the reporter interviews Dick Splain, who he's died now, but he was the guy that wrote the Canada Assistance Plan Act. And he said, I was part of the National Anti-Poverty Organization then, and we had a fast. We had 300 people across the country fasting to protest the end of the Canada Assistance Plan Act. And what he said was, this guy that wrote it said, quote, "I see homelessness, more poverty, a real danger that children will be neglected, and that we'll see an underclass develop like in the United States, which has made it such a dangerous country." At that time, I was with End Legislated Poverty, and we had a news conference underneath the Hastings Street Viaduct, because we said, this is where people are going to be living if we lose the Canada Assistance Plan Act. So Dick Splain was right. We're right. I take no pleasure in being able to say, I told you so. But so that was one thing that happened in the early 90s, along with Campbell. Another thing that happened is the feds stopped funding social housing. Back in the 70s,
that's a big one. You're right.
Yeah. In the 70s, they were funding like 30,000 units of social housing a year.
Mhm.
Wow.
Now it's down to about 2,000 or 3,000, right? And the
Mhm.
ones, or it's higher than that, but the ones that they're funding are expensive rentals. They're not for
Right.
poor people
Yeah.
like were in the old days.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, there was a whole trend back there of massive budget cuts, massive corporate handouts. There was this group called the Business Council on National Issues. It was very embedded in the media, in academia, in big corporations, and they spewed out a whole bunch of propaganda about evil poor people, how we had to get wages lower, how we had to cut social programs, and all, how we had to cut the deficit. And yeah, that was really bad. And that's what we're living with now. That's why we have so many people homeless on the street.
And Brent, you can talk about all the reassessments that were done under Gordon Campbell too.
Yeah,
The medical
definitely.
reassessments.
Yeah, and you know, and it stems back to exactly what you mentioned too, Gene, is because homelessness is on the rise, and it's been that way for decades and decades. It's been pure neglect on government's behalf of keeping up with their end of, you know, taking care of their citizens, right? You know, but take care of the corporations, no problem. But here's a little bit of study that I did. Now it kind of leads up to the Gordon Campbell era. You know, rates were 1989. It was $275 for shelter, and then it got increased in February of 1992. It went to $325, and then in April 2007, it went up to 375, and it stayed that way all the way until, well, just this year, and they finally increased it, right? And when they increased it, it didn't go to your support. It went it went to your shelter only if, though, you had a permanent address. If you didn't have a permanent address, or your rent didn't go up, you didn't get it. Or if you're in like subsidized housing, you didn't get it either. And I think it was a missed opportunity. I think it was deliberately done that way, really, because it was the least expensive way of the government saying, look what we're doing, but we're not doing. Like, it was people that needed the money because of inflation, as we know, going up. And again, a missed opportunity, and it suppresses down the rates, really. And it kind of leads up to the Gordon Campbell era, really.
I was just going to interrupt you again there, Brent. Sorry,
Okay,
but I was just going to say, like, think about that for a moment. You were saying 1990 it was 275, right? You said 1990 275, and then
yeah.
and then it was like 3 decades later. So for 30 years, it stayed like it went up $100 in 30 years. $100.
Yeah.
So basically $3 $3 a year.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That's terrible. $3, on average, $3 a year it went up.
Compare it with this.
Yeah.
When in 1973, I was on welfare with my 2 kids, and we rented the bottom floor of a house, and I saved $100 a month. I was on welfare.
Wow.
Oh,
I can't remember what the rent was or what the welfare rate was. And I mean, I was frugal, but yeah, it was possible to live on welfare in those days.
Yeah, it shows you how the buying power has eroded away. I mean, huge. And it's about there's no like rent control. There's no vacancy control. It goes up per year. I mean, granted, landlords will get a certain percentage every year that it goes up. But now there's been a lot of call on vacancy control, where if a tenant leaves a unit, now the landlord can jack up to unlimited amount of whatever they want it to go to. But when I moved into where I am now, the rent started at $1,365 now, and then that went to $1,385. Now it's at $1,412.70. So 2%. So now I'm thinking, well, if the government doesn't give it a rate increase next year, because they're going to say, well, we gave $125 this year. I'm guessing that they're not going to give nothing next year. They're going to say, oh, well, we gave money last year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what, you see the amount going up. So I wanted your take on subsidized housing within the market sector. I don't know if you know what I mean. Is like I was mentioning before we launched the show, like 30% of your income. Like I passed a resolution over to the minister who's now in charge of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, Honorable Sheila Malcolmson. I had given a suggestion, an idea, and she thought it was brilliant. She said, "That's a brilliant idea." She said, "I love it that when you think outside the box." And I said, "Well, what?" I said, "What the idea is that, as we know, single mothers, single fathers, they get a rental assistance program. I call it RAP. It's called RAP. Not the rap. The rap music, RAP." And then they got the seniors one. It's Safers. It's a senior supplement, and it's all under the umbrella of BC Housing, right? So my resolution was extended over again under for PWD or income assistance, whatever they want to call it, some new fancy name, a title, but extend those to that program over to there. People can live in market housing. They don't have to live traditionally under BC Housing, like a nonprofit, right? They can still live in their own home. They don't have to move, because seniors don't have to move, or single mothers, single fathers. They can still live where they're living, and they get to pay 30% of their income to their landlord, which they still have their own money that they're going to pay the landlord. That's just a top up to it, and then they give it to the landlord. So what's your view on that?
I would love to know, just before Jean answers, I would love to know, and I've told you this before, what the exact percentage of actual subsidized housing is reserved for, or that people with disabilities. I wonder what percentage are actually in subsidized housing. Like, what percentage of PWD are in subsidized housing? Because I think it's like really low, like between maybe 5 to 7% is only reserved for that, and it's like everybody else is like,
yeah,
whatever you can get kind of thing. It's market value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that percentage is. Your landlord is only supposed to be able to raise your rent by 2% last year. So if they raised it by more than that, it was illegal, and you should be able to challenge it at the RTB.
Mm-hmm.
The big problem with rent increases is that we don't have vacancy control, which means that the landlord can raise the rents as much as they like when someone moves out.
Right.
There was a CMHC study that was released in February that showed that on average, the difference in Vancouver between rents in occupied apartments and apartments that were for rent was $800 a month.
Whoa.
So that basically means that on average, Vancouver landlords are raising rents $800 a month when somebody leaves. So if we had vacancy control, they wouldn't be able to do that, and that would help maintain thousands of units more affordable in the city every year. In terms of your idea of RAP and SAFER, those two programs aren't very good, even for the people that they're intended for. I know with SAFER, for example, which is the one for people who are seniors, the purpose of it is to bring your rent down to 30% of your income. But the problem is that they have a limit on rent. So in Vancouver, the limit depends on where you live. And in Vancouver, the limit is $803 a month if you're single. So they'll only bring your rent down to 30% if your rent is $803 a month or less. I have a friend who was paying $1,060 some, and she got SAFER, but it only brought she was still paying like 40 or 50% of her rent, of her income for rent, because the SAFER limit is so low. So unless we can get the government to raise the limits on SAFER and RAP, those programs are virtually useless.
Okay, because there's a threshold, I guess, and if they don't lift that threshold, then you're pretty well messed up.
And what do you think about the bank strategy about raising rates to to supposedly fix the housing crisis and things like that, or
I thought it was interesting what Jim
Yeah.
Stanford said, that the whole amount of inflation could be accounted for by the amount of interest rates, that the interest increase that the banks had set, rather than by things like wage increases or price increases, things like that. So that was pretty interesting. I think I think it's good that they haven't raised the rates, and I think they should reduce them.
Yeah, I mean, it's when I came up with that resolution, obviously there must be like a cap, and if the government's not willing to lift that cap, then yes, it would actually cause probably more problems, obviously, than what it is worth. I mean, those two programs extend over to put PWD or people on welfare into another awkward situation. I mean, I'd say maybe just raise the rates instead, right? And then people have an autonomy of deciding what they want, where they want to live, and have that freedom of I guess, then it comes down to like a basic income then.
It was interesting what during COVID, when the feds came up with CERB.
Oh yeah.
People that lost their jobs got an automatic $2,000.
Yeah, they got just like that.
It was kind of a recognition that that's what you need to live on.
Right.
And if that's what a worker needs to live on, why shouldn't it be what other people need to live on? I think probably it should be more for people with disabilities because they have extra costs.
Yeah.
When that formula came out, that was in 2020. They used the LICO formula when it came out with that, how they calculated that formula. And so there was a lot of chatter about people asking for people with disabilities called DERB, Disability Emergency Relief Benefit, equivalent to what CERB was. And we had a meeting, Jeff and Sonia and myself had a meeting with the minister just a few months ago. And I brought it up when I had her on the show. We mentioned about that formula, same thing. And what came out with Gene is that the government wants to go with the market basket measure. They don't want to go with the LICO formula. They want to go with
because it's cheaper,
which is a cheaper option of it. Not by a lot, like it's a little bit cheaper, but per person. So you add it up over millions and people. Now that's going to be a lot of money that they're saving. But it goes to show that each year it should be at like least $2,600 now, because it go up by $200 each year. Of course, then it needs to be tied to inflation. And there's that keyword inflation again. So it goes to show that it can be done. It's just the willpower. Really, it's the political will. I mean,
the other part of that is that billionaires, we're getting more and more billionaires, and the billionaires are having more and more billions. Like I just read that Jeff Madison has $15 billion. All billionaires should be outlawed. How
many billions do you really need? Yeah.
Well, and then you go into the store and then you look at some of the produce; it's all rotting. I mean, marked down at 50% off. Really, like
it is purposeful oppression. I mean, we talked about the idea when they legislated the clawbacks, for example, back in 93, 94. I mean, right. It's legislated, right? It's purposeful legislated oppression, right? And that's important to highlight that. And I didn't know if you wanted to go, because I kind of interrupted you, Brent. I didn't know if you wanted to go back to the Campbell era and talk about the medical reassessments or not, because it's kind of related to that too. But
there was a good. I'm glad you mentioned that, Neil, because kind of touching on that clawbacks. So what I'll do is I'll rewind back temporary to 94. I think it was 93, 94 maximum, and then I'm going to jump to the Gordon Campbell era. So back to 94, Gene, if you remember. Back then, the government, they were finding ways of saving money, as we know. So people with disabilities at that time, and I didn't even know that, but at that time, I think it was 94. Neil could probably correct me on the date on this. 93, 94-ish. There was pensions. People with disabilities had
I
pensions.
think it was a little bit before that, but it was
Yeah.
right around there. Yeah.
That time area. I got on after that. So yeah.
Me too.
I missed,
I missed the boat on that. I missed the boat.
I
on
missed
that,
it. Yeah. But you
Yeah.
know, I remember back then years ago, and they had all the workers, and they say, Brent, apply for everything that you can, all these different subsidies. I go, my doctor won't fill out the forms. I can't fill out something that you're not medically assessed, what you qualify for, all the different like Crohn's disease and malnutrition and all these other things. Like they have all these splashy headlines, nutritional supplements, all these things, but they were attached to medical conditions to get those. And my doctor said, no, I can't do that. Like I can't just magically make these things appear if you don't have them. And Brent, you don't want these conditions, right? I mean, as you get older, people are going to develop them anyway, but you don't want them just to get a few extra dollars. I go, well, that's what the worker said. Yeah, out to lunch. He said, just raise the damn rates, he says already. That's what he said. He goes, that's where the problem is. And he got it though, Gene. He's nailed it. He says, just raise it. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. So yeah, I guess that's the part I want to mention is that it used to be pensions. They took it away magically, magic unicorn, pink unicorn.
The unicorn, yeah.
Yeah. And so we fast forward to the Gordon Campbell era. So when they formed, that
was 2002, around that.
Then. When the BC Liberals at the time, when it was BC Liberals, now they're the BC United Party. In 2001, they formed government, as we know, under the Gordon Campbell era. So when they formed it, they found the government wanted to find ways of cutting back, and we discussed that in the show earlier. So what they did was the government said, okay, across ministry, we need to cut. Where can we find ways of cutting and getting more money? Obviously, they want more money for the big corporations, right? I mean, make them more billionaires. I mean, and their corporate pals. I mean, why not, right? However, on the backs of the disabled people. What they did was they went through the ministry and they found ways of cutting back the resources of making disabled people to go to their family practitioner and to be reassessed to see if they're still disabled enough to be on their system. Unfortunately, I was one of the ones. Boy, yay, hey Brett, yeah. I was one of the ones who it put me through a lot of, gave me PTSD at the time, anxiety, you name it. I went 3 months with no income at all. I was renting from a friend, which I had 2 weeks to go before I was going to be kicked out. I would have been homeless. My mom at the time was in the transition of going into a home. So the ministry said to me, oh, well, you can move back to your mom. No, my mom's going into a home. What? Yeah, we're putting her into a home, but I can't even get out there on the bus because I got no medical transportation now. I have no income. I guess I could walk, but I mean, it would take me probably at least 8-9 hours to get there. Yeah. So I had to go. They said, well, in order to get back on the system, I had to go back to my doctor to be reassessed. My doctor lost it. He literally blew up. He freaked. I was told to leave the office. They gave me $20 to go over to McDonald's next door to go and have lunch. I said, oh, please don't. I don't want to eat that stuff, right? I mean, no, anyway, I don't even want to get into that part, but you know what I mean? But they felt bad. Like I had no money. I had 4 cents in my bank account. They even wanted to see that.
Remember when they used to always say empty your pockets?
They wanted to see
how much change do you have?
So I said, well, here, look, I said, so I had to go to the bank and get them to print it out, 4 cents. And then the other account.
And when's the last time you were incarcerated?
Yeah. And the other account was overdrawn. I had 2 accounts. And so they gave me $20. I had lunch. So they said, well, we'll come over there. My receptionist says, I'll come over there and let you know when the doctor is ready to see you. So she came in, waved her hand, and I said, well, can I bring my root beer into, yeah, that's fine. Just come on in. And he was yelling on the phone. He had a yelling match with the government. He says, you want a lawsuit? No problem. I have my lawyers all set up. he says, I've already designated this guy. He, his disability doesn't go away. He says, but you want me to go away? He said, I'm not going to go away. I'm a doctor. So next thing you know, I had two ladies showing up at my door, Gene, and they were so upset. They said, I'm so sorry this happened to you. They retroacted back. They gave me back the money from the law, what I lost, for what I lost in a sense, from their stupidity. But it also caused me to almost be homeless. And they actually then topped it up to, I guess, retroactive up, which, yeah, yay, benefit of it. So I had to go buy food with it. And they told me to go to a food bank in the meantime. The food bank wouldn't even give it to me because I need to show them that I need proof why I'm there. I needed to show my latest stub from the government. So I couldn't even get food from the food bank. I was in a bad situation. And so that's the kind of the era that I went through. And I just hope that the government realizes the hardship that they put people through of one simple little thing that they did.
Yeah.
And a whole
it caused ripple effects.
It does.
Basically, for the last 30 years, there's been ripple effects since what Harcourt did in 93, 94, and what Campbell did. We're still experiencing the ripple effects of those two really bad decisions, right? 30 years later, there's still ripple effects from that.
It's like learning from their mistakes and going forward and saying, let's not do this again, and let's listen to people with lived experience. Let's listen to families, caregivers, allies. They know everything that's going on around people, and I know we can make a better society for everybody. It's the government, it's the political will, and some people say, oh, well, it's the stakeholders, it's the gatekeepers, it's telling the government what to do. But if that's the case, they all need to get in line and say, how do we make things better for everybody? Yeah,
we've been on for about a half hour, Gene. I don't know how long you wanted to be on, Gene. I didn't want to keep you if you
A half hour is good for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we've already been on for a half hour. Do you want to go another half hour or
No?
Oh, okay. So we just want to wrap up now then?
Sure, we could.
Okay.
I guess to kind of conclude what I just mentioned, Gene, what's your take on that? Where do you see things kind of going forward with government policies? I guess to kind of to conclude what we're talking about here.
So I think what you said at the beginning of this about policy choice, government is making a policy choice to keep people poor. It's making a policy choice not to have enough housing. Back in the 90s, it made a policy choice to basically bash people who were poor. Now that those choices are disguised in all kinds of language about inclusivity, but the result of it is the same, right? People don't have enough money to live on. And I think we're going to, with Pierre Poilievre coming on strong, I think we're going to have to try really hard not to have him in power. And then the other thing is try to build up a really, really strong coalition that can fight for the kind of economic, social, racial, and climate justice that we need to basically survive as a human species. And it'll be a lot of hard work and involves, reaching out to allies and like you telling your story so that everyone understands, what people are experiencing. I think that's a good part of it. But it's going to be a lot of hard work. Sometimes I feel like I've got a callus on my forehead from banging it against the wall.
I hear you on that one.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a lot of hard work going forward. And that's why I got into advocacy. Because seeing all the changes that I saw that were happening, that were affecting people's lives, Gene, and that's why I got involved with Ellie Taylor back years ago. And I remember a meeting that we mentioned it, we said it was about raising the rates. It was a raise the rates campaign. And at the time, it was about increasing the rates to at least bump it up, right? And then having goals of achieving to get it up to a livable amount. I'm going to touch base with her again and see where things are at. But I know that this fall we're going to be really ramping things, getting things ramped up, and I'm not going to give away a lot of about the campaign, what we're working on. That Jeff, Sonia, and myself, and some others, we're going to be ramping things up here really, really strong. But it's kind of geared to raising the rates. But we really putting a guideline on the government and getting them to commit to a guideline of getting things up.
No more poor bashing, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, honestly, I would like to see it not. I know, and I know Jeff. If you're watching this, Jeff, I mean, I hear you. I know, like a lot of people are saying, well, it can't be at the poverty line. Like it's the starting point. If we can get the rates up to at least like that level, we can work with it from that point on, and we can get it, but tie it to inflation. Like it has to be tied, and there's no. I'm going to make sure the government understands it. Like, there's no option not to tie to inflation. That is the criteria. So how do we get to that? Well, I'm going to get a lot of ideas. I want people to network with us. We can get all these ideas. I know, end of the day, like long term, there's a lot of call for basic income. That's long term, right? But in the meantime, we need to get these rates across British Columbia and Canada.
There is a danger with basic income.
Oh, okay.
I'm totally in favor of people having more money, but there's a lot of really right-wing people that want a basic income. And the reason they want it is because they want it to be a top-up to really low minimum wages so that corporations don't have to pay decent wages. Taxpayers would pay it through the basic income top-up. So, and the other reason they want it is because they're thinking if they keep it low, then they can combine all of the programs into one so that some people that are getting a higher income, like say me, I'm getting the old age pension, that's about $1,700 a month, that I would be lower. They would take money from me to give to poor people instead of taking from Jimmy Pattison. So when you talk about a basic income, you have to have two things that you're talking about. One is that it has to go with ever increasing minimum wages, like bringing the minimum wage up to a living wage at the bare minimum. And the second is that it can't involve destroying existing social programs or making existing social programs worse, which is what some people who want a basic income want. So anyway, just throwing
that's a good point, actually, because I mean, that's my fight with that's been my fight with the clawback of the pensions, because a pension is a targeted, you talk about targeted supports, right? A pension is a targeted wraparound support. And I mean, and like a child tax benefit, that's a targeted support. There's lots of targeted supports, right? Where they're zoning in, and those are important, right? And so that's been my beef, is that, if you claw back a pension, that's a targeted support that you're saying, we're going to invalidate that and claw that back. And I don't think that's right, because you're basically saying, oh, well, for people with disability, or if they're on welfare, we're just going to invalidate a targeted support. That doesn't matter, right? So you make a great point, Gene. Great point.
There's the basic income. There's the GLBI, I think, guaranteed. Like it's like a seniors one, but is it kind of like the same thing though, Gene? Like one's like a GLBI, guaranteed livable basic income, and there's the basic income.
Whatever the name is, you have to be sure that that along with it, minimum wages keep rising,
right? And
existing programs don't get destroyed.
Yeah, they don't get kind of clawed back, because of that, or they get dismantled, and then you're worse off. You're in a worse. They
can say, "Oh, you don't need your old age pension of $1,700 a month because you can get the guaranteed income of $1,000 a month."
Right.
You want that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Have to kind of be, I guess they say, cautiously, very, very extremely cautiously optimistic when it comes to that.
And if they want to leave, and if the people in power, who are the ones that support corporations right now, if they're the ones that design it, it's going to be to help them, not to help us. So you
Yeah.
have to be aware of that. It's not just a matter of saying what we want. It's a matter of changing the power structure so that the people in power
Mhm.
do what we want, actually do it, right?
I
Yeah.
appoint Gene
Yeah, I
to be in
totally.
power.
I need to take off, you guys.
Yeah,
It's
Well,
been
it was a
nice
gr-
talking to
it
you.
was a great show.
I've
Though.
We've got
Thank
another
you for
thing
coming.
happening here.
Yeah,
Awesome talking with you, and I'd
Yeah.
love to have you back on another day. We'll have a more of a discussion for sure in a short segment. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, I got to take off
Yeah.
here. Bye-bye.
yeah. Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much, Gene. Thanks for
Okay.
coming by.
Okay. Bye.